This is a banknote. It serves as a medium we use to purchase goods or services. Of course, it also functions as a store of value. But many may ask a question: if we all use money, why is it that capitalists can use money to generate profit, while textile workers in England at the time could barely survive day by day? In fact, the harder they worked, the harder their lives became. Why doesn't working diligently to weave fabric lead to a corresponding increase in wealth? Is it simply because they didn't work hard enough? Perhaps, after reading the first 4 chapters of Volume 1, Marx's work, you would tell me, it's because the means of production are controlled by capitalists, and based on that control, they appropriate surplus value, leading to unjust distribution. This causes capital to concentrate in the hands of a few, reinforcing their so-called fortresses, and creating a sharp wealth divide between the rich and the poor. All of this is rooted in money. To the capitalist, money serves 2 functions. It is both a medium of exchange and a tool for generating profit. The key lies in how they use various forms of surplus value to create a cycle of capital circulation and accumulation. This is what we often refer to as getting rich through capital. In Volume 1 of Capital, we are introduced to 2 monetary formulas. The first is the most common. Money, M, serves as a medium in the exchange of goods. The second formula is the core of how capital generates profit, and the key to understanding how the capitalist mode of production operates. However, in Volume 1, Marx does not fully analyze the cycle. It is only in the 6th draft of Volume 2 that he fully unpacks the entire process. In this formula, dashed lines indicate interruptions in circulation. W and M' represent goods and money that have increased in value through surplus value. This also means that the content we're about to explore will be quite abstract and complex. First, the capital cycle is a key concept in the capitalist mode of production. It can be broken down into 3 stages: using money to buy goods on the market, employing capital in production, and finally, selling goods to convert them back into money. Let's start with the first stage. Capital begins in the form of money, M, which the capitalist uses to buy goods, W, to kickstart the entire production process. You might ask, what goods does the capitalist buy with the initial money, M? The answer is means of production and labor power. So W here should be further detailed as MP, means of production, plus LP, labor power. Thus, the formula becomes MP plus LP. In this exchange, the capitalist is not seeking immediate use value but preparing for profit generation that follows. At this point, there's something quite unsettling. Human beings, that is, labor, are bought and sold like a commodity. This is what Marx emphasized: the commodification of labor. In a capitalist market, labor is treated as a type of commodity that can be bought and hired by capitalists. It is the key to capital generating profit, because labor is living labor. It has the ability to produce surplus value. Simply put, the amount of labor a worker provides always exceeds the value of the wages they receive. In the production process, the worker creates more value than the wages they are paid. The excess is the surplus value that the capitalist appropriates. This is one of the core conditions for transforming advanced value into capital, or in other words, for producing surplus value. At this stage, capital exists in a form that can generate both value and surplus value. This is productive capital. Marx called this form P, productive capital. Therefore, G and P represent the same capital value, differing only in form. G is the monetary form of capital, while P is the productive form of capital. Thus, the role of money here is the initial form of capital value. Monetary capital, G, is the capitalist's way of advancing capital. This also shows that from the very beginning, the capitalist's use of money is completely different from that of the worker. For workers, money is merely a tool for exchanging goods. Their cycle is A, labor power, G, wages, W, consumer goods. After purchasing goods, their cycle ends. In other words, they sell labor to get wages, use that money to buy essentials, and that's it. But for the capitalist, money is not just a medium of exchange. It's a tool for converting into means of production and labor power to create surplus value through production. This is the foundation for capital to generate profit. So, capital value completes the transformation from its monetary form to its initial productive form. Simply put, the first stage is the transformation from monetary capital into productive capital. However, There's one key point that must be highlighted. Labor is bought with money, in the form of wages. But this is deceptive. Wages merely mask the truth. The core issue is that the capitalist owns the means of production. This means the worker owns nothing but their labor power. They are forced to sell it in exchange for survival. This is a kind of double exploitation. Not only are they stripped of ownership of the means of production, but they must also rely on it to live. When workers are separated from the means of production, they can no longer produce wealth on their own. Labor can only create value when combined with capital. As a result, they must sell their labor to survive. So behind the appearance of equality and voluntariness in monetary exchange lies the capitalists' control over labor, thanks to their monopoly over the means of production. It's not the result of exchange, it's the condition that makes exchange possible. This inevitably leads to unjust distribution, because workers have no bargaining power against capitalists. Their relationship is unequal from the very beginning of the cycle. On this basis, let us now move on to the second stage, the function of productive capital. Transitioning from the first to the second stage can be understood as the process of transforming monetary capital into productive capital. This section serves as the preparation for the second stage, the operational cycle of productive capital. Just like a machine that must have its gears properly aligned to start moving, capital must go through a precise setup to begin its circulation. Thus, the formula from the initial stage to productive capital P is MP, means of production, plus LP, labor power, EP. The dashed line here indicates a pause in capital circulation, but the cycle itself continues. We can easily understand the concept of circulation. Capital is used to buy means of production and labor. If these two elements haven't yet combined in production to create a commodity with greater value than the initial investment, then they haven't entered the realm of circulation. It's like buying fabric and machinery. If you haven't sewn them into clothes yet, they aren't commodities ready for market exchange. This process is called transitioning from the sphere of circulation to the sphere of production. And it's in this very process that exploitation intensifies. Capital, through production, combines labor power with means of production to create goods. At this stage, the worker doesn't just create value equal to their wages, i.e. their own value, but also produces surplus value for the capitalist, value that will be reinvested and circulated again. Now, the capitalist doesn't just control the value of commodities, they also possess that value in the form of money. When they spend money, it inherently carries the intention to recover it. Money only returns to the capitalist if the goods are sold. And to sell goods, the capitalist must be the one producing them. For workers, survival depends on selling their labor. To live, they must consume constantly. This requires capitalists to pay them wages periodically, enabling them to purchase the goods they need. Thus, the worker repeats the cycle, C or CMC. To complete this cycle, capital must always maintain its monetary form, capital as money capital, positioned in opposition to wage labor. Moreover, for workers to keep consuming and producing, they must have access to necessary living supplies, provided as commodities for them to buy. This is like many different capitalists establishing separate commodity cycles across various sectors. Once this system of commodity circulation is established, it grows rapidly, leading to expanded production and increasingly powerful capital accumulation. When wage-based production becomes the dominant mode, commodity production also becomes widespread across society. And this widespread practice pushes the social division of labor to become increasingly intricate. Commodities produced by capitalists become more specialized, and steps in the production process start to split into independent production chains. This ties back to what we mentioned earlier. The development level of MLP, labor power, also determines the development of MP, means of production. During this process, the capitalist continuously presses the accelerate button to accumulate more wealth, while the worker can only comply with the production process to maintain the status quo. They become objectified, alienated, to the point where they don't even realize that the very forces binding and exploiting them are created by themselves, and handed over to the capitalist. Then one day, someone suddenly recognizes the essence of exploitation at this stage. and attempts to press a pause button to stop the cycle. But when they press it, nothing happens. Is the pause button broken? No. It's just that once history reaches a certain stage and its laws are established, individual will become insignificant and powerless against the vast wheel of historical progress. This is the law of history. It does not move according to individual will. As Marx once wrote, any form of commodity production is capable of becoming a form of labor exploitation. But only capitalist commodity production is a historically distinctive form of exploitation. This form, with its labor organization and enormous technical achievements, transforms the entire economic and social structure and surpasses all previous historical stages. At this point, you might ask, if history doesn't follow individual will, are we trapped in a never-ending cycle? Doesn't that contradict the logic of history? The answer is, nothing is absolute. Everything is relative. And that's the core of dialectics. An objective law often unfolds in three phases: from nothing to something, from quantitative change to qualitative change, and from opposing contradictions to dialectical unity, constantly progressing in a spiral. For example, from feudalism to capitalism, and then to socialism, that is a spiral of upward development. Hundreds of years ago, it was the workers who desperately tried to press the pause button, but failed. Today, it's the greedy capitalists sucking the lifeblood of others who are now desperately trying to hit that button. But this time, the wheel of history is rolling forcefully and crushing them. By observing historical movements, we see some changes are positive, those aligned with the people's interests, capable of self-correction and evolution. Others are negative, often protecting the interests of a privileged minority. These eventually get swept away. Take the French Revolution, for instance. King Louis XVI ended up at the guillotine. Now let's return to the third and final stage of the cycle, the sale of commodities and the realization of capital's profit, i.e., W prime G prime. In this stage, the commodity W prime is converted into money G prime, money after profit. The final commodity W contains not only the value of the means of production, but also the surplus value generated during labor. In W prime, surplus labor and the value of production inputs have completed the process of capital appreciation. Thus, the formula is no longer W, but W prime. We can expand this into W prime equals value of means of production plus value of necessary labor power plus surplus value. What transforms W into W prime is the relative value amount when compared to the amount of capital P invested to produce it. The value of W prime equals the retained value during production plus the surplus value created by productive capital. Thus, the total value of WP exceeds the original value of capital P. The surplus value W is that excess. Similarly, G prime also means G prime equals G plus G, that is, the original money plus surplus value. Through the sale of the commodity, the capitalist converts W prime into G, thereby realizing the increase in value of monetary capital. At this stage, monetary capital G prime exceeds the initial investment G because it includes surplus value. The key point here is that capital, through the exchange of commodities, releases the surplus value from the goods and transforms it into money. It is in this step that the growth of capital is truly realized. The capitalist sells the commodity, recovers the original investment, what we casually call getting your money back, and gains surplus value on top. Therefore, the formula at this stage can be expanded as GWPW means G. It may sound abstract, so let's take a simple example. Suppose producing a shirt costs 30 yuan, including materials, wages, and other costs, but the capitalist sells it for 80 yuan. The 50 yuan difference is surplus value. It represents the value the worker created beyond their wage, and this surplus entirely belongs to the capitalist. This increase is not just an increase in value, it represents the expansion of capital itself. In the monetary capital cycle, W and G respectively represent commodity capital and monetary capital, different forms of capital in the value increasing process. The transformation from W to G is not merely a numerical change, but a continuous motion between capital value and surplus value. The capitalist uses production and sales to increase the capital initially advanced. Note, this number doesn't change just to remain idle, but to allow for reproduction and expansion. Simply put, it's about using value to generate more, enabling the self-expansion of capital. At this point, those new to the subject might ask, how do we distinguish a regular business from a capitalist who exploits and oppresses workers? The answer lies not only in the ownership of production means, but, more importantly, in the distribution, how surplus value is handled. We explain this in detail in the second part. This is why I believe this is one of the most sensitive issues in explaining capital volumes 1 and 2. Today, many still confuse the concepts of capital and industrial capitalism, so when they hear capital, they immediately think of exploitation and class struggle. This misunderstanding could unfairly affect legitimate businesses. So whenever I talk about the distribution of surplus value, I often have to repeat myself. Please don't be annoyed. I believe this is not about shouting empty theories or emotionally stirring slogans like, "Down with exploitation, rise up." If we do only that, it's merely manipulating awareness and playing cheap emotional games for views. That's why each of my discussions tends to be long and may feel heavy for those who lean toward emotional content, because it focuses purely on objective reasoning, without any of the market-style, feel-good elements. Returning to our main content, by now you've understood the 3 stages of the capitalist cycle. When combined, we get the formula GWPWG. You'll see, the capital cycle is a sequence of tightly linked, interdependent processes. Each stage is a transformation of capital's form. 2 stages belong to the sphere of circulation, while 1 belongs to production. In each stage, the form and function of capital shift, until the cycle ends and it returns to its original form, completing a full loop. In the circulation phases, capital appears as monetary and commodity capital. In the production phase, it becomes productive capital. In the whole cycle, these 3 forms do not exist separately. They are functional manifestations of capital at different times. Together, they create what we call industrial capital. Carefully observing this cycle, you'll notice a malfunction in one link disrupts the whole chain. For example, if it halts at circulation, monetary capital becomes hoarded cash. If it halts at production, means of production are unused and workers are unemployed. If it halts at sales, goods go unsold and circulation stalls. Like a clogged pipe, the cycle breaks down. This corresponds to macroeconomic phenomena like stagnation, overproduction, market recession, and inventory buildup. Looking from a broader perspective, you'll see capital starts as money but gradually expands and becomes large-scale industrial capital. This is the root of the pyramid-shaped distribution structure. Large capital constantly suppresses, merges, and monopolizes smaller capital in the same sector, concentrating wealth in the hands of a few. From this, it's clear, industrial capital begins and ends as monetary capital. Money is merely the temporary form that advances capital. Its ultimate goal is realizing exchange value, not use value. The core driving force of capitalist production is profit. The production stage in the capital cycle is just an interruption that bridges GW and WG, acting as the middle ground for generating surplus value. Production isn't for goods themselves, it's a means of accumulating wealth through capital appreciation. In essence, the entire cycle is about capital generating profit through production and circulation, then returning to its monetary form, ready to begin the next round. Capital continuously expands itself, with profit as the core goal, while production is just the tool. At this point, I believe you can now answer the question raised at the beginning. Why is it that, despite both using money, capitalists can generate profit while English textile workers could barely survive? The answer is, workers use money for personal consumption and to maintain their labor power, while capitalists use money to circulate and increase capital value. Production is merely the invisible intermediary tool for wealth generation. The result, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. We can also better understand a famous quote from 1776. The rate of profit does not increase with prosperity as do rent and wages. Rather, it is low in wealthy nations and high in poor ones. Highest in those places collapsing the fastest. If this still feels abstract, we can look to history. When the Roman Empire collapsed, its people had become so alienated they watched the army fail without concern, even opened the gates to invaders, and cheerfully joined the enemy ranks. Why? Because the wealth gap had grown enormous, power was centralized, and corruption was rampant. The national treasury became a tool of aristocratic exploitation, and the political system was completely paralyzed. The result, societal classes came to hate each other, and then quietly, ignorantly, and passively destroyed one another. Even the most brilliant minds were corrupted, writing sophistries and twisting truths to make hostility and conflict more refined and disguised, and in the end, destruction. I think, by now, you clearly understand this essential point. The economic base determines the superstructure, and the superstructure, in turn, reacts back upon the economic base.